So my daughter JJ is now 8 months old, and we're very much into story time. And her favorite story to read is The Very Hungry Caterpillar by Eric Carle. This is a great book, kind of iconic. I'm sure many of you know it. But for me, as I've been reading it to her, 3 times in a row, 4 times in a row, 5 times in a row, she keeps demanding it. I keep thinking about these different ideas for how it relates to the global economy. So for today, what I want to do is talk about how our global economy is acting like the very hungry caterpillar. The story starts with a hungry little caterpillar being born. And the way our economy started was with a whole bunch of hungry little caterpillars that were really sort of kings and conquerors. That when we go back in the history, it really is this notion of feudalism that largely started this, and the accumulation of wealth really started with royal families and conquerors. These people had more than enough for themselves and their families, but they wanted more. And so they would just kind of go out and take it. And there were a hungry caterpillar that would just go out into the world and just start eating. The problem with caterpillars is that they really do act somewhat like a parasite, that they're born onto a host plant and they just start eating that host plant with reckless abandon. And that's really what we did see in early days of capitalism, of wealth accumulation. And even if they destroyed the one plant where they were born, that's not enough, that they'll often go to other plants, and you can end up with caterpillars that destroy an entire forest. This is especially true when it comes to colonialism in our economy, that when powers leave their original land and come to a new land, it's like an invasive species, where if that ecosystem isn't ready for that, it can cause huge damage. So just like a species of very hungry caterpillars can not only destroy their host plant, but also entire forests. Sometimes they even move to new lands. And this is colonialism. This is what happened, that as ruling nations would eat away at their own people in their own land, they would often travel to new lands and essentially become invasive species, feeding off the people and the land in these new areas. And just like colonialism has destroyed so many cultures and families and ecosystems, invasive species often do the exact same thing. So the story goes that on Monday, the very hungry caterpillar ate one apple and was still hungry. And then the next day ate 2 fruits, and then 3 fruits, and then 4 fruits. And, it's a really nice, cute little story. And in the same way, the global economy kept developing and kept growing. In the early 1600s in the Netherlands, we had the first stock market, which really created that first financialization and allowed people to trade shares in companies. In the late 1700s, Alexander Hamilton, very famously now, created a new sovereign debt system and allowed governments to borrow money at unprecedented rates. This created a huge, huge boom in bonds. This led directly to the founding of the New York Stock Exchange, right, which just saw this hungry caterpillar eat more and more. Now, at this point, the financial economy was still a pretty small fraction of the overall real economy. People were still living their lives, doing their thing. Financialization was starting and was certainly allowing the caterpillar to grow. We were starting to see that GDP growth. But it's really when we get to the part of the story that on Saturday, the caterpillar starts eating a whole bunch of junk food. And really, that's where we started to get in the early 1900s. This is where we really started to see financialization start to take over. That the financial sector started to become a more dominant part of people's day-to-day lives. This is really where the problems start, because eating junk food leads to stomach aches. And in the same way, in the early 1900s, we started to see a lot of junk being created in the financial system. We started seeing financialization of a lot of really, really important things. And this led to stomach aches. The Great Depression was probably the most famous one. And instead of eating healthier things, we started eating more and more junk. We had the military-industrial complex, really start post World War II, where, huge investments going into things that don't really add to people's lives. It gives us this feeling of safety and security, but it started gobbling up huge parts of our global economy. Up until the 1970s, we had what's called the gold standard. The gold standard really meant that for every dollar that was circulating in the economy, we had a dollar worth of gold somewhere in a vault somewhere. But as the economy kept growing, as the caterpillar kept eating more and more junk food, we needed more bandwidth. So in the 1970s, America left the gold standard. This allowed the money supply to explode. It created a whole bunch more wealth. It meant that we could create more money really out of thin air. But it also meant that the caterpillar kept eating more and more and more junk food. Reagan introduced trickle-down economics in the 1980s. Clinton introduced free trade in the 1990s. Again, the caterpillar kept eating. The financial sector became a larger and larger part of our economy. And that now we're still eating a whole bunch of junk food. That when I look at things like NFTs or cryptocurrencies, that right now, all of this money that's flowing into AI, it almost feels like we need an excuse that we're just looking for more and more junk food for the caterpillar to eat, that this unsatiable appetite needs to be satisfied, that we have to keep growing. We have to find new things for the caterpillar to eat, new areas of the economy to become financialized. And this is my big fear right now, that it does feel like we're eating a whole bunch of junk food in today's economy, really just to get the caterpillar fatter and fatter, bigger and bigger, for the economy to just keep growing. And to what end? Now, Saturday, eating all this junk food, the caterpillar did end up with a really big stomach ache that night. And that is, I think, what a lot of us are worried about in terms of the global economy, that what is the next big stomach ache? When's that going to arrive? Certainly the way we're doing things right now is not sustainable. So I think we're all kind of worried for that next stomach ache and keeping an eye out for that and what that's going to look like. But on Sunday, the caterpillar goes back to eating leaves and starts to feel a lot better. And this is really the change that I'm trying to bring in terms of the global economy, that I do think we need to get off the junk food and go back to eating things in a sort of more sustainable way. Now, we still do need capitalism. I'm not someone that says that we need to replace capitalism or burn down the system right away. That what's required is just a small transition. That we just need to rethink our capitalist system. And instead of eating junk food, go back to having a system that is a little bit more manageable and that builds things that are actually going to serve people and the planet. And that after that seventh day, after eating some leaves, the caterpillar does turn into a cocoon. And this is where at some point, probably not in our lifetimes, at some point in the future, the whole system might turn to goo for a little bit. We don't really know what's going to happen and what's going to come next, but it wouldn't shock me that with this unsustainable system, right, that at some point, the caterpillar is probably going to turn to goo inside of a cocoon. But what emerges is something absolutely beautiful, which is the butterfly. And I'm spending a lot of time dreaming about what a butterfly economy could look like. That instead of a system that is built on this take, make, waste, linear process where we extract things, we manufacture things, and then after we use it, we just toss it into a landfill. That instead we can have a system based on a closed loop circular economy. Because that's the big difference between butterflies and caterpillars. I mean, there are a lot of differences, but one of the big ones is that caterpillars eat their hosts. That's what they kind of rely on. It is inherently unsustainable. It can't continue forever. At some point, they do need to transition to a butterfly that eats nectar and that eats decaying plants and animals. That's what butterflies eat. So I imagine this economic system where instead of depleting natural capital and human capital, we can actually have an economy that eats its waste, that is dependent on the waste that is produced, that the food for one industry, the input for one industry, is actually the waste from another industry. That it's a system based on creativity and innovation. That the value creation that we're doing is not about extracting things from people or the planet, but instead, the value creation is based more on beauty and innovation and creativity, where we have this beautiful social economy that is so strong. Because the caterpillar can only climb so high up on the plant. And we've climbed up pretty high. Our economy, we've done really well. We've grown a lot. We've brought a lot of people out of poverty over the last decades and centuries. It's been incredible. But I do feel like we're starting to hit a little bit of a plateau for how high we can climb as a caterpillar. But if we can manage to turn into a butterfly, there is no limit to how high we can soar. And what I imagine for the future is this beautiful butterfly economy. I don't totally know what that looks like. We're going to have to wait and see for a little while. For me, I'm really excited for this transition from a caterpillar into a butterfly. If this allegory resonated with you, I invite you to keep learning. I've got more episodes coming out, so make sure to subscribe. I've got a great newsletter that you can sign up for. And if you're ready to get the junk food out of your investment portfolio, sign up for a free consultation with me at my website, goodinvesting.com.